slowly take it off.
A relic of the Revolution is delicately ushered into the National Museum of the United States Army at Fort Belvoir, Virginia.
Did it. Good job.
Paul Mirando has spent 4 years putting together this exhibit to honor the Army's 250th anniversary.
This is the first Rhode Island regimental flag, and if it could talk, the stories it would tell.
You almost have to take your word that it's a flag. It's so faded.
You can still see the 13 stars, original 13 colonies. It was at Valley Forge, and then more importantly, carried by soldiers at Yorktown. So it's seen a lot.
Where has it been all these years?
This flag has not left the state of Rhode Island since 1784. We actually had to change the law to allow this flag to come out of the state to be on display.
We buckle it in the back, right?
Yeah.
As precious as the flag may be, what catches the eye is the lifelike figures of real people who won the war for America's independence.
Our focus is on the individual soldier's experience, what they sacrificed, and why they fought.
Beginning with Sylvanus Wood, who fought the British at Lexington and Concord, the famous shot heard round the world.
It's a moment of no return. We are in it now, and it's only going to get worse after this.
It's the beginning of the war. It's the beginning of the country, actually.
Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Rick Atkinson has just published the second volume of his planned trilogy on the Revolutionary War, beginning when American militiamen took the field at Lexington and Concord.
They're weekend warriors. They're soldiers who turn out once every few weeks to practice the manual of arms, to learn how to load a musket.
And what are the British forces made up of?
They're professional soldiers with professional officers. Men enlist in the Army for life, usually. So these are troops that know their business.
The headline in the local paper called what happened next, "Bloody Butchery."
It's a long, brutal day for both sides, but particularly for the British. There are bodies all the way from Concord to Boston.
The Americans had sent a message.
The Americans show that even though they're not the professional force that the British are, that they know how to fight, they know how to use weapons, and they know how to kill.
2 months later, the Continental Congress voted to replace the part-time militias with a full-time army.
The militias had given the British more than they could handle. Why do you need an army?
For one thing, they've got jobs. They're farmers, they're tradesmen, they've got families to take care of. You need to make this army into a force that can take on the British full-time.
It was June 14th, 1775, the birth date of the United States Army.
It will be the central institution that is going to determine whether or not the United States of America really does become a country.
The commander of the new army is known today as the father of our country.
You can recognize this guy from a long way away.
It's hard to imagine what the Revolutionary War would have been like without George Washington.
His ability to stay the course, to believe in the cause, to transmit his belief in the cause to the soldiery, makes him the indispensable man.
Washington told his troops, the fate of unborn millions will now depend, under God, on the courage and conduct of this army.
He's got a vision. He refers to generations yet unborn.
Generations unborn, that would be us.
That would be us.
In the summer of 1776, the Declaration of Independence was just a piece of parchment.
We declared our independence on July 4th, 1776, but it was up to our soldiers to fight and secure that independence.
In New York, a British force of 32,000 attacked Washington's new American army.
This is his first battle, if you will, after the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So a lot is riding on this. He understands that if he loses this battle, he possibly could lose the war and the revolution itself.
The British troops came ashore on Long Island, where Washington had dug in.
And the British devise a plan in which they outflank him. It's a catastrophe. He nearly loses the whole game at that point.
Washington barely escaped with his army.
Washington retreats into Pennsylvania across the Delaware River, and he writes to his brother, I think the game is pretty near up.
So what's so indispensable about that performance?
People were beginning to wonder, frankly, does this guy have the right stuff? He's going to show that, among other things, he's very bold, and when he's desperate, he's dangerous.
In an act of daring immortalized in American history, Washington crossed back over the Delaware and caught the enemy by surprise. The British had lost their chance to destroy the American army, and Washington would fight on for 7 more years.
So if we come away a little bit, Roddy, with this guy, you want to hold that arm on?
B.J. Ervik directed a team of artists who recreated the sacrifice of those years, down to the bloody knuckles of Sergeant Major William Seymour, recording the day's events in his journal.
I think that's a very reflective moment for somebody who might have just been in battle for a few days and has a moment to reflect on what he's doing in life and what is happening around him.
Have you had a chance to see the model yet?
I have not seen it. This is my first time, so lots of anticipation.
Retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Elaine Conway posed for the figure of Anna Lane.
I just lost. My heart just started beating really fast, so wow, it's pretty powerful. And now I really see how strong she was.
Passing the ammunition to her husband, you can see in her eyes the British are coming.
She's handing him a cartridge. He's wounded.
Leaders of today's Army got a VIP tour of their origin story, leading up to an audio-visual display of the battle at Yorktown, Virginia, where British troops finally surrendered.
Dismissed as amateurs early in the war, these soldiers withstood every hardship and challenge. And now, this American Army stands victorious.
Through 1,300 battles and skirmishes, the Army had outlasted the British Empire. "We fight, get beat, rise, and fight again," said one American general.
One of the lessons we should take from the Revolution is we're capable of doing remarkable things and overcoming extraordinary odds to get where we want to go.
It was nasty, brutish, and long. Should we so revere this war?
You know, I think we should revere what came out of it, and we should revere the sacrifices that went into it. The creation of the American Republic, it's one of mankind's greatest achievements. And how can we not be proud of that?
The last thing you see as you leave the exhibit is this quote from John Adams, one of the founding fathers. It is addressed to us. "You will never know how much it costs the present generation to preserve your freedom. I hope you will make a good use of it."
To quote the TV show The X-Files, the truth is out there. So when once secret intelligence records about the assassination of President John F. Kennedy were released not long ago, was the truth actually in there? Erin Moriarty is on the case.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that
This past spring, a congressional task force led by Republican Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna of Florida held hearings on Capitol Hill.
For over 6 decades, questions have lingered, shrouded in secrecy and speculation.
Top of the agenda, what newly released government records reveal about the assassination of President John F. Kennedy.
Mr. Jefferson Morley.
Jefferson Morley waited 30 years for this moment.
The CIA destroyed a lot of records related to President Kennedy's assassination.
This was kind of a dream come true for you, wasn't it? To be able to, after all this time, be able to tell the American public what you had found?
Yes, it was. It was a great honor.
Morley is a researcher and editor of JFK Facts, a newsletter on Substack dedicated to the JFK assassination.
This event, the President of the United States is shot dead in broad daylight and no one's ever brought to justice for the crime. That's something people still care about.
Since 1995, the former Washington Post reporter has been on a singular mission to push the government to release every document related to the death of the 35th president.
Why are they hiding the names of dead men? Because they have something to hide.
Morley is consumed with the story, even though he remembers little about November 22, 1963.
3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade in downtown Dallas.
I was in kindergarten, but I remember my family watching the TV all weekend.
The events of that day, along with eyewitness accounts, were forever captured on film.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.
The official version of the shooting came from a 1964 report issued by the Warren Commission that concluded the president was killed by a single bullet fired by 24-year-old former Marine Lee Harvey Oswald, and that Oswald was then killed 2 days later.
Oswald has been shot.
By Dallas nightclub owner Jack Ruby.
Why was Kennedy killed? Who benefited? Who has the power to cover it up?
And then, 28 years later, the film JFK was released.
Oliver Stone's 1991 film JFK was a game changer.
Mark Updegrove is a historian and author of a book about JFK's presidency, Incomparable Grace.
This is a major filmmaker with a blockbuster movie at the time, offering the notion that there was a much greater conspiracy at work. And I think that fundamentally changed the way we thought about the murder of John F. Kennedy.
There are hundreds of documents that could help prove this conspiracy. Why are they being withheld or burned by the government?
The star-studded movie centered on former New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison, played by Kevin Costner, who believed Kennedy's assassination was part of a wide conspiracy involving the CIA and the mafia.
Kings are killed, Mr. Garrison. Politics is power, nothing more.
While the film was largely discounted by historians, public pressure led Congress to pass the JFK Records Act in 1992, ordering the release of all government records on the Kennedy assassination. And that's when Jefferson Morley, a seasoned reporter, began his own search for answers.
Because it's a great story. And because people weren't attacking it in a disciplined journalistic way, I kind of have the story to myself.
Morley, from his apartment in Washington, D.C., says he never guessed he'd still be working the story 30 years later.
And this is all JFK.
Yeah. So you'll see here, we go day by day or week by week through 1963.
Morley estimates that 4 to 5 million pages of records have now been released.
Look at this is handwriting you have to get through. There's redactions you have to go through. That would make me crazy.
It does make you crazy, and you have to be very patient.
Morley says records show what the CIA kept from the Warren Commission, that the agency had been monitoring Oswald's behavior for years, tracking his travel, reading his mail.
We never understood before now how pervasive the surveillance of Oswald was. This guy was watched for 4 years. People at the top of the CIA knew what he was doing. They knew about his contacts. They knew about his personal life.
Did you kill the president?
No, I've not been charged with that. In fact, nobody has said that to me yet.
The official story that one man alone killed the president for no reason, we know that's not true. Lee Harvey Oswald was not a lone nut. He was a known quantity to top CIA officers right before President Kennedy went to Dallas. We need an explanation of that story, and we still don't have it.
Morley's patience seemed to be finally paying off when even more documents were released.
A lot of people are waiting for this for years, for decades.
Following President Donald Trump's executive order this past January.
And everything will be revealed.
And what did those documents reveal?
The attitude of obstruction and obfuscation from the CIA started on November 22nd, 1963, and that attitude, unfortunately, has continued to the present day.
What was clear from the congressional hearing that followed in April is that there are still no bombshells, nothing to conclusively contradict the official story of the assassination. Still, according to Morley, there is more evidence that the CIA buried what it knew about Oswald. But why?
So if, in fact, the CIA had been watching Lee Harvey Oswald and they didn't realize that he was about to assassinate a president, that's very embarrassing. Couldn't that just be the only reason why they hid all that information?
That's one.
Incompetence.
There is no CIA official who has ever said that.
As far as I can see, there's nothing that changes the conclusion that Oswald acted alone in the assassination.
It might surprise you to hear that Leon Panetta is as curious as the rest of us to learn what's in CIA records, since Panetta ran the agency from 2009 through 2011 under President Barack Obama.
Wouldn't you know as a former director?
Not really, because frankly, when you're a director of the CIA, you're pretty much focused on the threats that you have to deal with in the world that you're in.
But Panetta says the CIA is often concerned that releasing documents, even after decades, can jeopardize agency assets.
Was there a legitimate concern that they were trying to protect, or was there something more sinister? And you know what? We really don't know the answer to that question.
So you don't rule out the idea that there might be something more sinister. You're just saying there's no evidence of that.
That's correct.
The transcript, which the CIA withheld from public view for half a century.
Last April's hearings brought Jefferson Morley full circle.
I'm actually optimistic that we can get to the bottom of this matter.
Testifying next to Oliver Stone, whose film first inspired him. Even without any startling disclosures, Morley is confident that hidden in a government document somewhere, there's a story waiting to be told.
People are expecting a blinding flash, a smoking gun. When you've been at this for a long time, I'm not looking for a smoking gun. I'm looking to complete the picture.
He's known as the father of American literature, Mark Twain, whose wit and wisdom is as relevant today as ever. A new biography of the famed author is just out. Our Robert Costa gives us a read.
The Mississippi Valley is as tranquil and reposeful as dreamland, and has nothing this worldly about it, nothing to hang a fret or worry upon. It's a beautiful sentiment, and yet it contrasts with the fretful and worried life of the man who wrote those words, Samuel Clemens, known to the world by his pen name, Mark Twain.
If you go just a couple of blocks up Hill Street, you find Mark Twain's boyhood home.
Twain died 115 years ago, but his books are still being read and hotly debated around the globe. It's quite the legacy for a mischievous boy of modest means, raised here in Hannibal, Missouri.
He grew up with the Mississippi, the roaring Mississippi, just steps away. The world seemed to be at his fingertips.
That was the passageway to the world. Absolutely. It was the international highway of 1835.
Like
your books. Thank you very much.
Perhaps you guessed from the white suit and whiskers just who Hannibal native Jim Waddell is talking about.
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Keep writing.
I intend to.
Waddell has portrayed Twain for 3 decades. A performance always in demand when Hannibal's streets are filled each spring for the Twain on Main Festival.
I can't eat with this white suit on.
It's a good gig in Hannibal, Missouri.
Yeah, it is.
And a few people want to do it.
Yeah. You
got to keep it up. You got to have a clean white suit. You got to keep that mustache trimmed.
You keep the suit white by doing no work.
I love meeting the new people because there's 44 different countries that visited Hannibal last year.
Perhaps you recognize these literary figures as well. Tom Sawyer and Becky Thatcher, Corbin Asbury and Ainsley Ahrens competed against other 8th graders in town to represent the characters here in Hannibal.
Are you surprised that some author who lived years ago still seems so relevant to all these people who come to Hannibal?
I am, but not really, because his words that he said, they still work with us today. They're wise words.
Wise words with more than a touch of humor. Always do right. This will gratify some people and astonish the rest. Readers, suppose you were an idiot, and suppose you were a member of Congress. But I repeat myself.
Twain said he was not just an American, he was...
The American.
The American.
I think that part of the continuing fascination with Mark Twain is that he combines in his person both the best and the worst of our national culture. Twain really was born in the American heartland. In fact,
Pulitzer Prize-winning biographer Ron Chernow has chronicled the lives of great Americans, perhaps most famously Alexander Hamilton, whose biography spawned the Broadway musical. Chernow's latest tackles the life of Twain, a figure who has never left the national spotlight.
Twain didn't necessarily want a biography of him being written. He once wrote, "Biographies are but the clothes and buttons of the man. The biography of him," he said, "cannot be written." But you have clearly carried on.
Right, and that line was in my head every single day that I worked on this book. I kind of have this image of Mark Twain coming back to life and saying, "I told you so."
Chernow traces Twain's sardonic humor to the pain in which it was rooted. Although he enjoyed boyhood adventures that would inspire Tom Sawyer, his father was a failure in business. The fear of poverty and an anxious pursuit of wealth would dominate Twain's adult life.
What do you see in this house that others might miss?
I see his personality. All the angles and porches and turrets, it's like all of the different sides of his personality. And he always loved conspicuousness, and this was probably the most conspicuous house in the city.
We spoke with Chernow at the sprawling mansion Twain built in Hartford, Connecticut.
Was Mark Twain happy here?
No, he was happy here. It was far and away the happiest 17 years of his life. It was this, idyllic period. He had this large, somewhat eccentric house. He had a rich and gorgeous wife. He had 3 beautiful and smart daughters. It was really a charmed life.
Although Twain became wealthy as a writer and public speaker, he poured his fortune and his wife's into ill-fated investments. The most notorious was the Page Compositor, a typesetting machine that Twain was sure would make him millions.
The themes that run through Twain's life and his work, politics, corruption, money, class, race, get-rich-quick schemes, all seems quite relevant to America today.
Yeah, it's a great American story. And I think that there's so many things that he said, for instance, about politics that really resonate today. One line that used to drive him crazy was, "My country, right or wrong." He said that we should support our country always and our government when it deserves it.
Would President Trump be a familiar figure to Twain?
I think that President Trump would be a familiar figure to the extent that one of the great stock characters in Mark Twain's fiction is the salesman. You could see it in President Trump. You could see it in so many different figures in American life, the big talkers, the big shots.
It's no small irony that Twain was nothing if not a big shot himself, a man who craved attention as much as money. But fame also emboldened Twain to speak truth to power, most enduringly through his masterpiece, Huckleberry Finn.
One of the things that I argue in my book was that there was no white author in the late 19th century who engaged more fully and I think more affectionately with the black community than Twain. Now, I have to point out, early on, if you read letters that he wrote when he was a teenager, they're full of crude racist remarks, and not only about blacks. It seems like just about everybody. By the time, in the 1880s, he publishes Huck Finn, which, whatever its imperfections, is still, I think, the great anti-slavery novel in the language.
For Ron Chernow, Mark Twain is still a vital presence in American life. His words continue to make us think, and almost certainly laugh.
Why do the works of Twain endure when so many of the great authors of the past, their books are sitting dusty on the shelves of American libraries and schools?
I think it's a very, very good question. He likened a fine literature to wine, and he said, "My writing is water." He said, "But everyone drinks water."
Everyone drinks water. They're still drinking water.
They're still
reading Twain.
They're still reading Twain.
Mo Rocca starts us off this morning with a trip back in time to America's revolutionary past.
The Allied ring is relentlessly tightening around the Reich.
Newsreels tell the story of World War II. The early still photography of Matthew Brady chronicles the horrors of the Civil War. But with the American Revolution, which began 250 years ago this month, it can be harder to appreciate the life and death stakes in the colonists' fight for freedom. What did it feel like in Lexington and Concord, the two Massachusetts towns, where one April day in 1775, the Patriots and British Redcoats first exchanged fire? Do you all think a lot about what the mood was like early that morning on April 19th?
We discuss it a lot. We read accounts, we read diaries.
Larissa Saskin, William Rose, and John Nichols are members of the Lexington Minutemen Reenactors Group. Can you understand how upset they were?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
It's impossible for me, as someone who was born in the 80s, to ever imagine what it had been like to have my freedoms taken as much as theirs were. To be pushed into that proverbial corner where my only choice is to fight the world's best army.
When we think about the revolution, most people, they start with, the taxes, the Stamp Act, the Townsend duties, back in the 1760s. By the time you get to 1775, it's a whole different ballgame.
By that point, the mother country and her Massachusetts colony were beyond estranged, says Jim Hollister, a park ranger at Minuteman National Historical Park. Parliament had imposed onerous taxes without representation, sent thousands of British troops to occupy Boston, and, most egregiously, had stripped Massachusetts of the power to govern itself, power it had enjoyed for nearly a century.
What gets somebody, living a comfortable life to then take the most dramatic action?
Do they feel humiliated?
Absolutely. Humiliated and threatened.
On April 18, 1775, 700 British soldiers began marching 18 miles through the night from Boston to Concord to seize arms that had been stockpiled by Patriot militiamen.
There's not supposed to be a Massachusetts army. That is treason.
Punishable by?
By death, really.
So they're really taking a risk.
They are taking a huge risk.
About halfway between Boston and Concord, the town of Lexington, which happened to be where two future founding fathers, Sam Adams and John Hancock, were lying low. Hancock was one of the wealthiest men in the colonies and a major financier of the Patriot cause. Adams had helped plan the Boston Tea Party. Paul Revere rides into town at about what time?
He gets here at about 11:30 p.m.
Yes, Paul Revere, who famously sounded the alarm about the approaching Redcoats.
John Hancock, Sam Adams, and Paul Revere were standing right here. A chill runs up your spine.
According to the Lexington History Museum's Sarah McDonough, Revere made a special stop here to urge Adams and Hancock to flee.
John was very hesitant to leave. There are men outside who are going to fight the might of the British Empire. He wants to be a part of that. He sees himself as a leader, and he very much was. Sam Adams was said to have sort of placed his hand on John's shoulder and said, "We don't belong here."
The two leaders escaped under cover of darkness as 77 brave Patriot militiamen stood guns drawn at sunrise on April 19th as the world's most vaunted army approached. It's not known who fired the first shot, but one thing is clear. It does not go well for the Patriots with this first battle.
No, not at all.
The colonists scattered, 8 of them killed, a terrible toll for this tight-knit community.
All of these people were intimately connected, which makes the wave of grief that much worse because everyone lost someone.
Now word is radiating. They've killed our people in Lexington. So the militiamen that are turning out after that are infuriated.
Jim Hollister showed us where those Minutemen, called so because they were ready at a moment's notice, gathered later that morning.
And they're up On the top of that hill, there's over 400 of them.
To take on the Redcoats as they arrived at Concord's North Bridge.
Then a shot rings out from the British side by all accounts, and then a second and a third. And one of the Minutemen is grazed in the forehead, and then Major Buttrick gives the fateful order, fire, for God's sake, fire. And that was the first time that a colonial officer ordered his Minutemen to fire on the King's soldiers. Once the Minutemen open fire, the casualties in the British are very heavy, and they just break and they run.
There's no turning back.
There's no turning back. And for the Minutemen, imagine seeing the backs of British soldiers running from you.
Throughout their grueling 18-mile retreat, the Redcoats took fire from a growing number of colonial militiamen fighting from behind rocks and trees. This was terrain the Patriots knew well. It was now the British suffering humiliation. By the time their day ended in Boston, more than 70 of them were dead and hundreds more injured.
What changed that day?
The idea that the crisis could be settled peacefully. The idea that they were going to be able to return to their normal lives. The world that they knew was gone.
The following month, the Second Continental Congress convened in Philadelphia. There, delegates, including John Hancock and Sam Adams, appointed George Washington the commander of the newly formed Continental Army. The Revolutionary War had begun. And for reenactor William Rose, himself a military veteran, the story of that fateful April day will always be worth retelling.
Bring those guns up. Maybe no one will remember me 50 years from now, but if some kid remembers me because I gave him a great story that he can relate to, think about the immigrants, 1607 Jamestown, or 1620 Plymouth, or 20 minutes ago in the southern border or anyplace else. They're coming here for a reason, for the ability to not have somebody else having a boot on your neck. If we can get rid of all the nonsense, the red and the blue and the value judgments, and just look at that reason, that's what America stands for. And if I can convince one little kid that this is the place to keep striving for that, then that kid can be us dressed up in another 50 years.
To help us continue the countdown to next year's 250th birthday of these United States, Tony DeCopel takes a closer look at our nation's most enduring document.
Ladies and gentlemen,
it was 1986 when Looney Tunes aired this public service announcement featuring Bugs Bunny.
For 200 years, amendments have allowed our Constitution to grow as a country. The 13th, for instance, put an end to slavery, while the 19th gave women the vote. It was intended to be amended, the Constitution.
That was then. This is now.
You have to go back more than 50 years to find a meaningful change to the Constitution. How long can we work as a country without updating, reviving our Constitution?
Well, the real fear that the founders had was that we would stop listening to each other.
Jeffrey Rosen heads the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia.
They thought self-government was hard, and that crucially requires deliberation and debate.
Before anyone could even consider a national constitution, of course, there was the Declaration of Independence, ratified in 1776, and the Articles of Confederation, agreed to in 1777, a full decade before the new Constitutional Convention.
Why did we need it? Why wasn't the Declaration and the Articles of Confederation enough?
Support for the Constitution and its ratification was pretty slender.
Jill Lepore has written more than a dozen works of American history. Her latest, We the People, describes a constitution ratified by the people it governed and designed to be changed by the very same. In other words, we aren't stuck with any of it. The U.S. Constitution includes, in addition to the 3 equal branches of government and a schedule of regular elections, a mechanism for change to the Constitution itself.
They came up with this Article 5 of the Constitution, which is the amendment provision, which had been insisted on by the people. People were like, if you were going to have a written document, we need to have the ability to amend it ourselves.
In fact, Lepore says, though we often think of the Constitution as the final draft, it was always designed to be a work in progress.
Many Americans might assume that the framers finished their work in Philadelphia in 1787 and thought, great, it will never change again. But clearly they expected it to be revised constantly.
Yeah, they absolutely did. And remember, like, a whole bunch of them refused to sign it because they didn't think it was good enough.
Before the states would agree to ratify it, she says, some insisted on revisions. The result, a set of amendments we now know as the Bill of Rights.
It was a huge debate. There were more than 200 amendments proposed by the states.
This early draft at the New York Public Library shows 12 of those proposed amendments. The final version, ratified in 1791, was whittled down to 10, including some of the bedrock ideas of modern America: freedom of speech and religion, a right to bear arms, and, for the accused, the promise of a fair trial.
The Constitution actually is supposed to be, Hamilton said, it's like a sunbeam.
But the Constitution was also a tangle of compromise and omission. None more tragic than the compromise over the institution of slavery and the exclusion of women from political life. Rosen says there was one concession, though, that James Madison, one of the document's framers, would not make.
He refused to admit into the Constitution an endorsement of slavery. He said the idea that there could be property in men wouldn't be written into the Constitution because they want to leave it up to future generations to eradicate slavery.
Though it took 100 years and a civil war, America at last had what some call its second founding, adding amendments that, among other things, abolished slavery, guaranteed citizenship to the formerly enslaved, and gave all men the right to vote, regardless of race.
This is just an amazing artifact.
Meredith Mann is one of the curators of the library's upcoming celebration of the country's 250th anniversary.
This is the roll call for the House of Representatives. So this is the sheet of paper where they kept track of who voted yay, who voted nay for the passage of the 13th Amendment.
It was just this incredible day. Galleries were packed. They even had women in the galleries. Frederick Douglass's son, Charles Redmond, was in the gallery, and the house just was nearly blown over by the burst of energy.
It's trying to make the promise of the Declaration that's absent from the Constitution real.
Exactly.
It is up to us.
These days, even though the language of the Constitution hasn't changed lately, the interpretations still have.
We still reinterpret it quite regularly, and by we, I mean the Supreme Court.
That's absolutely right. And none of the founders expected constitutional change to come mostly from the Supreme Court.
Well, so I find this actually to be one of the craziest facts. The Constitution does not give the Supreme Court the right to determine the constitutionality of a law passed by Congress. They just assert that right.
They did.
Rosen says the Constitution is still the answer to our problems, not the cause. And yet, for the moment, he worries about how it's being used.
Checks and balances. They're in there, they matter. How are they working?
There's a broad agreement that checks and balances are not working now the way they were supposed to. Congress has stopped acting and refuses to check presidents of its own parties, and the courts have become vastly more powerful than the founders anticipated in deciding almost every political question and insisting that they have the last word. So whether or not you like what's going on in our politics today, I think you have to say this is not what the founders intended.
The founders never claimed to have created a perfect country, but in the Constitution, they did try to pass on the tools to build a more perfect union.
There are people who think the Constitution is so old at this point, it has no bearing on the life of our country today. To that, you say what?
The Constitution was written in the 18th century, but it was expressing principles vindicated as recently as yesterday's news. The basic idea that a president should not be a king, that power corrupts, that we are a government of laws. These are the ancient ideas of freedom, and every country that has forgotten them has descended into dictatorship and tyranny. It is historically irresponsible to dismiss the Constitution as outdated. It's absolutely eternal and timeless.
And now, another chapter in the story of these United States. This is Connor Knighton. It was negative 34 degrees when I visited Yellowstone National Park, but a smile would have been frozen on my face no matter what. America's first national park was my last stop on my 2016 quest to visit every national park, from Acadia to Zion. Ulysses S. Grant never visited Yellowstone, but as president, he signed the Yellowstone National Park Protection Act into law in 1872. None of the members of Congress who voted to preserve the land had ever seen it in person either. What they had seen were incredible photographs and paintings from expeditions to present-day Wyoming. Explorers shared sketches and stories, informing officials of a wonderland already well known to Native American tribes of the area, a place unlike anywhere else in the world. In any season, Yellowstone is magical, home to dramatic canyons and pristine lakes, geysers and hot springs. The park is also a safe haven for species including what wildlife watchers have deemed Yellowstone's Big Five: elk, moose, grizzly bears, wolves, and bison. But Yellowstone's legacy isn't about what it contains, it's about what it represents. Set aside for the benefit and enjoyment of the people, Yellowstone may have been our first national park, but its preservation kicked off what became a complex network of nationally protected places, a concept replicated to great success all around the world. In the years since my park hopping quest, I've been fortunate enough to visit a number of national parks in other nations. But wherever I roam, I've found there's no place quite like home.
And now, another chapter in the story of these United States. When Henry Ford introduced the moving assembly line in 1913, it revolutionized manufacturing. Cars like the Model T could be built far faster and cheaper. By the 1930s, the big three automakers, Ford, Chrysler, and General Motors, employed hundreds of thousands of workers on their assembly lines. But the work was exhausting, fast-paced, and dangerous.
The automobile strike holds the nation's headlines.
And on December 30th, 1936, frustrated workers at GM's Fisher Plant No. 1 in Flint, Michigan, stood up to GM by sitting down. They refused to leave the plant, halting production from the inside. In 1987, Sunday Morning caught up with then 82-year-old Bud Simons, who'd been one of the union leaders at the plant.
Are you scared?
Hell no. I had enough men behind me. I wasn't scared. Didn't have anything to lose but my goddamn brains.
Before long, the strike would grow to more than 135,000 workers spread across 17 plants. After 44 days, on February 11, 1937, GM became the first automaker to recognize the United Auto Workers.
After 6 weeks of stoppage, workers will again turn the wheels of industry.
Chrysler followed soon after, and after a series of violent clashes, Ford finally recognized the UAW in 1941. With that success, union power surged. And by the mid-1950s, 35% of American workers belonged to a union. Today, that number is closer to 10%. After decades of automation and globalization, car makers employ far fewer American workers. But the Flint sit-down strikers secured wages and benefits that reshaped many industries. and in the process helped expand what's become a signature of these United States, a thriving middle class.
And now, a chapter in the story of these United States. This is Lee Cowan. $35 million in 1933, almost $1 billion in today's dollars. That was the price tag to build this. Considered the grandest of bridges, golden in its silhouette against California's setting sun. By all accounts, building the Golden Gate Bridge was really a ludicrous idea. It was too long a span, too high, too treacherous. San Francisco Bay had never been particularly welcoming, after all. It's cold, its currents are merciless, its fog disorienting. But in the midst of the Great Depression, most would have built a bridge to the end of the earth if it paid.
The world's largest single span across San Francisco's Golden Gate rapidly takes shape.
It took 4 years and 10,000 people to get it done, many of them toiling at terrifying heights with only a safety net between them and the water that was nearly 800 feet below.
We used to have to go from one cage to the other on a 2x12 plank up there, 500-600 feet, no handrails or nothing on it. Believe me, it was hairy.
Workers like Frenchy Gales, whom Charles Kuralt met in 1987.
Did you ever fall off?
Well, I was walking across one of the cross beams, and a gust of wind coming, I just went off backwards there and landed my tail in the thing, and I was so scared I just stood there like a gopher in a hole.
But you hit the net?
Oh, yeah, the net was in already. She scared the hell out of me when I felt that fall.
Some were killed instantly on the job. Many, many more were maimed by lead poisoning and falling steel objects. The ones who were left each night climbed up there again the next morning.
The Golden Gate is for the West Coast what the Statue of Liberty is for the East Coast. The symbol of freedom, possibility, and hope. Aspirations just as lofty as the bridge itself.
And now another chapter in the story of these United States. Tobacco had been cultivated and smoked by Native Americans for centuries. Introduced in Europe by none other than Christopher Columbus, tobacco eventually became a sensation. Profits from its sales would sustain Britain's fledgling colony at Jamestown and help fund the Revolutionary War. But growing tobacco is notoriously labor-intensive, and that labor was initially done mostly by enslaved Africans. In fact, until the invention of the cotton gin, most Africans brought to the New World worked on tobacco plantations. In 1881, a Virginian named James Bonsack patented the cigarette rolling machine, which helped turn tobacco into a mass-market consumer good. Tobacco companies shipped millions of packs of cigarettes to American GIs during both World War I and II. And by the 1950s, 45% of Americans smoked.
It is a judgment of the committee that cigarette smoking contributes substantially to mortality from certain specific diseases and to the overall death rate.
That began to change in 1964, when the Surgeon General released a landmark report linking smoking to cancer and heart disease. 2 decades later, another report found that smoking was, in fact, addictive. Of course, in recent years, smoking, once considered glamorous, has become increasingly stigmatized and banned in places like restaurants, even on airplanes, where it used to be commonplace.
So I don't like to smell smoke when I'm out eating, enjoying myself.
What about people that like to smoke when they're having a drink and eating?
It's too bad for them.
Today, the U.S. grows a fraction of the tobacco it did 75 years ago. Fewer Americans smoke, and we're living longer than ever. But in many ways, we've simply replaced one addiction with another. These days, rather than reaching for a smoke, a lot of us just reach for our phones instead.
And now, another chapter in the story of these United States. With a top speed of 6 miles an hour, it might not seem like much today, but when the Switchback Railway debuted in 1884 at Brooklyn's Coney Island, it represented a turning point. That's when the American amusement park was born. By the 1920s, 1 million people a day were visiting Coney Island to walk along its famous boardwalk, eat a hot dog from Nathan's, or take a ride on the Cyclone. 100 years later, you still can.
This is the granddaddy of coasters.
But what made Coney Island unique was its accessibility. It was an affordable escape for working-class New Yorkers, and its impact was felt far and wide. Soon, there were thousands of amusement parks across the country. Some of those would close during the Depression. But the industry was forever changed in 1955, when Disneyland opened in Anaheim, California, near Los Angeles.
To all who come to this happy place, welcome.
In many ways, Disneyland was everything that Coney Island wasn't. Meticulously clean, family-friendly. Notably absent were the wacky sideshows, mermaid parades,
3, 2, 1, go!
and hot dog eating contests. Walt Disney spent a record $17 million on Disneyland, a figure dwarfed in 1971 when Disney World opened 5 years after his death. Its price tag was more than $400 million, and American families have been making the pilgrimage to Central Florida ever since. Today, there are dozens of major amusement parks across the United States. The industry has come a long way since Coney Island's Switchback Railway thrilled the masses. The roller coasters have gotten a little faster, too.
In a city rich with museums, Faith Saley has discovered one of Washington's hidden gems, the one-time office of Civil War nurse Clara Barton, the woman they called the angel of the battlefield.
If you don't know to look for it, you might pass it by. This ordinary address between the fast casual Korean and red sauce Italian restaurants in downtown Washington, D.C. But a sign out front hints at the remarkable story this building has to tell.
When people hear that there's something called the Clara Barton Missing Soldiers Museum, what's their reaction?
Usually, what? It's almost like you're stepping back in time as you step up.
David Price oversees a museum that honors the lesser-known contributions of one of this country's greatest humanitarians.
And one woman, Clara Barton, would carve for herself a unique place in the annals of service to mankind.
Before gaining fame as founder of the American Red Cross, Barton made her name as a Civil War nurse who brought badly needed aid to a Union front line low on provisions and morale.
They are without supplies. They're using corn husks to wrap wounds. And here is Clara Barton showing up with 3 wagon loads of supplies. You name it, she had it.
She had some close calls on the battlefield.
She's giving a man a drink of water, and a shot is fired and goes through the sleeve of her dress and it instantly kills him.
There was no more to be done for him, and I left him to his rest. I have never mended that hole in my sleeve.
In 1865, with the war nearing its end, Barton saw another unfulfilled need and characteristically stepped up to help.
The government woefully unprepared for the repercussions of war. No dog tags, no official procedure for informing the survivors that your loved one has died, and she cares about those left behind.
Barton successfully petitioned President Lincoln for permission to start a missing soldiers office, and her mail slot was soon flooded with inquiries from wives and mothers desperate to learn the fates of their enlisted loved ones. She and a small staff meticulously compiled the names of the missing onto large rolls, which were then reprinted in local newspapers.
This is a clipping from the New York Tribune.
Oh, all those names. Just hundreds and hundreds of names.
Mm-hmm. This is a way of not only acknowledging that someone was looking for them, but also in an endeavor to try to find any information.
You're still getting things.
Oh, absolutely.
Michelle Crowell works in the Library of Congress's Manuscript Division, which houses Barton's papers, including some of the anguished letters she received.
This was the mother of a soldier. The first that we knew of him was to find his name among the dead at Salisbury. I still cherish a hope that this news may not prove true. Will you aid me in ascertaining the truth of this report, the natural longings of a mother's heart to know something of her dear boy who died in the hands of such an enemy prompts me to write to a stranger.
God, it's heartbreaking. And to think she received thousands of letters like that.
Often, Barton found that the soldiers she was searching for had died. But for their next of kin, that knowledge provided much-needed closure.
Add that to the fact that the only way the survivors could get a pension is if there is an official disposition of them being killed.
3 years after opening the office, Barton submitted a final report to Congress. By her count, she had received over 63,000 pieces of correspondence and determined the fate of some 22,000 missing men. Finally, dependents could claim benefits and families could grieve. The building itself might have been lost too. After Barton's death at 90 in 1912, it became a shoe store. In the 1990s, it was purchased by the government and slated for demolition when a carpenter named Richard Lyons conducted a routine inspection of the dilapidated third floor. He noticed a hole in the ceiling and pulled himself up, as he recounted in an interview before his death in 2023.
I was on my hands and knees. I took my flashlight shine around. I put my hand on a piece of metal. And I went to move it out of my way. And when I moved it, I turned it over, and it was Mrs. Soldier's office.
Lyons had stumbled upon a time capsule of Barton's work. The building was spared and, after a lengthy renovation, opened to the public as a museum in 2015, 10 years ago this month.
What do you think Clara Barton's legacy is?
It all adds up to take action and care for your fellow man. Her efforts, physically and mentally, wore her out. She gave it her all. So let's all give a little bit.
And now, a chapter in the story of these United States. This is Lee Cowan. It was likely the most important land deal in history. More than 800,000 square miles of wide open space that went for about 2 cents an acre, bought largely sight unseen by the buyer, Thomas Jefferson. The president wasn't really seeking all that land at first. All he really wanted for the United States was the valuable port city of New Orleans, then controlled by the French. Turns out Napoleon Bonaparte needed money for his wars in Europe, and that vast territory known as Louisiana, named in honor of King Louis XIV, was a drain on his resources. So, in 1803, he sold the whole lot, lakes, rivers, forests, and prairies, lands from the Mississippi to the Rocky Mountains, for $15 million. Our U.S. envoys in Paris, James Monroe and Robert Livingston, were stunned, and without even asking permission from the president, they signed on the dotted line. As our Charles Kuralt once mused,
Livingston didn't even know what he was buying. Lewis and Clark hadn't yet been west to see what was there. But they signed the papers before Napoleon could change his mind. The United States was suddenly doubled in size.
it was, of course, already home to Native Americans who had no say in the matter. Thousands died trying to keep their land from westward moving white settlers. It was manifest destiny tested, and America's expansion wasn't over yet.
Opinion this morning from former New York Times columnist Charles Blow, with thoughts about our nation's newest federal holiday, Juneteenth.
Last month, I visited Emancipation Park in Houston, a park established in 1872 by the formerly enslaved as a space to celebrate Juneteenth, the date in 1865 that the news of emancipation was proclaimed in Galveston, Texas. Raymond Manning, the board chair of the Parks Conservancy, told me that his corporate sponsors had grown skittish about supporting Juneteenth-related activities and anything with words like culture, heritage, or Black history, words nearly impossible to omit in this park. This, for Manning, is a bit of a whiplash. 4 years ago, in the wake of the massive protests following the killing of George Floyd, and in a Senate riven by partisanship, the bill to make Juneteenth a national holiday passed unanimously. A year before that, in the closing months of his re-election bid, Donald Trump himself had proposed making it a national holiday in his so-called Platinum Plan for Black America. In fact, in 2019, Trump's statement commemorating Juneteenth ended by saying that on Juneteenth, we pay tribute to the indomitable spirit of African Americans. Now the mood in the country has shifted. Pluralism and racial justice have been demoted in the zeitgeist as Trump has returned to office on a mission to purge the government and much of society of diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. This has spurred an erasure of Black history and Black symbols in some quarters, a phenomenon that I call the Great Blackout. From an executive order condemning the direction of the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, to the National Park Service removing, but being forced to restore, Harriet Tubman's image and quote to a page about the Underground Railroad. There are, unfortunately, countless examples. That chill is having a dampening effect on the upcoming observation of Juneteenth, far beyond Emancipation Park, as multiple cities have canceled Juneteenth celebrations altogether. In this sad new reality, America's youngest national holiday is now caught in the crossfire of America's raging culture wars.
It's been 50 years since the final days of the war in Vietnam. David Martin now with some of the men who bore witness to the fall of Saigon.
People poured from behind buildings and revetments.
This is what the end of the Vietnam War looked like. South Vietnamese soldiers swarming a Pan Am airliner to save themselves from the rapidly advancing North Vietnamese army.
They left their wives, their children, their aged parents on the runway while they forced their own way on board, a rabble of young enlisted men.
CBS News correspondent Bruce Dunning was on board.
The plane raced down the taxiway, swerving to avoid abandoned vehicles, perhaps even running over people.
This every man for himself route played out across South Vietnam as communist forces from the north launched their final offensive.
The question was not will they attack at some point, but when will they do it?
Now 83, Stuart Harrington was one of only a handful of American military personnel still left in Vietnam.
The map in my office began to show more and more red arrows, all pointing south.
President Gerald R. Ford called South Vietnam's collapse a great human tragedy and ordered the immediate airlift of Vietnamese orphans.
Some of those put aboard the plane had been born only weeks ago.
CBS News correspondent Murray Fromson witnessed what happened next.
The huge plane crashed into a field about 5 miles from the end of the runway.
78 orphans and 35 Americans were killed.
What can one say except, when will the misery in this country ever stop?
With Vietnam rapidly approaching what Secretary of State Henry Kissinger called the worst case, he cabled American Ambassador Graham Martin, "We must evacuate our people and do so as soon as possible." Americans and Vietnamese flooded Tan Son Nhut Airport outside Saigon, but enemy shelling killed 2 Marines standing guard there, Darwin Judge and Charles McMahon, the last Americans to die in Vietnam.
The North Vietnamese bombed and rocketed the runway at Tan Son Nhut, so the runway became unusable.
Retired Marine Jerry Berry was a helicopter pilot aboard the armada of American ships off the coast.
Helicopters were the last resort, and 10:45 on the morning of 29 April 1975, Ambassador Graham Martin gave the order to commence Operation Frequent Wind, which became the largest helicopter evacuation in history.
Frantic to find a way out, civilians mobbed the U.S. Embassy.
The last place, the last hope, the last refuge where you could go and maybe still get a helicopter.
There were women at the gates just saying, please just take my baby, take my baby. And we had to tell them, we cannot take your baby.
Jerome Thomas was a Marine Guard at the embassy.
There were people that were getting crushed because of the crowd in the back were pushing, you know.
The crowd inside the embassy grounds is just huge, and it's never getting any smaller. You don't know how this thing is working, how it's going to end.
That's Barry's helicopter landing in the embassy parking lot.
I actually landed at the embassy about 1 o'clock and said, my orders are to pick up the ambassador. The Marine security guard runs into the embassy, comes back and says, well, the ambassador's not ready to go.
Instead, Barry and 70 other helicopter crews began lifting out Americans and Vietnamese. Barry's call sign was Lady Ace 09, and here's his voice from 50 years ago.
This is Lady Ace 09, roger, we're outbound at this time with our passengers.
As darkness fell, Jerome Thomas was ordered to lower the American flag.
This was the last time the American flag was going to fly over Vietnam.
19-year-old Marine takes down the flag for the last time.
Heartbreaking.
America's war in Vietnam was now in its final hours.
Now it's probably somewhere around 4 in the morning. I can see the tanks coming down the road.
You could see the tanks.
North Vietnamese tanks, because their lights are on. They're driving down the highway.
Everybody was afraid. The North Vietnamese army was advancing on Saigon.
Everybody knew these were the last birds.
These were the freedom birds.
Okay, well, let's pick it up here. Looks like things are about to close up, and we want to be able to give them the support they need. Go ahead and max it out.
That's Harrington maxing it out in the embassy parking lot.
Get into a double line. Everybody's going to go. Nobody will be left behind. I kung sa diduk. I repeated that over and over and over, that everyone was going to go, and I really believed it.
They want everybody in the embassy, Robert. Put everybody in and get in there.
That's the last picture taken of me in Vietnam.
It looks like a man who knows it's over.
Yeah, there was no doubt about it.
There were 420 Vietnamese still in the parking lot when new orders came in.
You are to land on the rooftop and deliver a message. I say again, to deliver a message. All U.S. must come out now.
Harrington had promised nobody left behind, but orders were orders.
I said to the Vietnamese, Matadi, I got to take a leak. And I walked into the door of the embassy and scooted up the stairs.
What did it feel like telling that lie?
I felt horrible. I felt like I'd given them my word, that our country had given them our country's word, and it all went to crap.
I landed on the embassy roof at 4:56 in the morning on 30 April 1975, and I called the Marine security guard over, and I said, you go tell the ambassador this helicopter's not leaving the roof until he's on board. And then my best aviator voice, I said, the president sends.
Order from the president. Did you have authority to?
I have no authority to do that at all. But, I mean, there's got to be an end here. 2 minutes later, his whole entourage are up, they're ready to go.
Ambassador Graham Martin brought the American flag with him.
So now I'm flying out, and of course I do the call sign, Tiger, 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 which means the ambassador's out, so everybody knows.
It was late afternoon in Washington when Henry Kissinger announced the news.
Our ambassador has left, and the evacuation can be said to be completed.
Except it wasn't. Here's Kissinger giving an off-the-record talk to the Army War College, seen here for the first time.
I come back from the press conference and I find out that they had left the Marines behind that were guarding the embassy.
The last American fighting men in Vietnam were barricaded on the roof as Saigon was about to fall.
been so many years now.
Their sergeant, Juan Valdez, is 87 now and living in a memory care unit. But some things you don't forget.
We thought for sure that we were going to be left there, kind of swallow hard, you know, because by that time the tanks were passing by from the Vietnamese.
It felt like the Alamo for a while.
Doug Potratz was on the roof with Valdez.
We didn't know if we were going to be the last people and be overrun.
The question that was going through everybody's mind was, should we fight or should we surrender? And everybody there to a man was like, we're fighting, you know, because Marines never surrender.
It was the lowest point, I think, in my life. We're thinking about all the people that have died, literally thousands and thousands of Americans, and it was all gone.
We were there for 2.5, maybe 3 hours waiting, and then all of a sudden, at a distance, we saw 2 choppers coming back.
Sir, there are 33 to 35 more Americans on top of that embassy for you to take out.
2 helicopters went back for the Marines. The first one picked up 22, and the second, the final 11.
11 tanks on board, including the commander. All the Americans are out. That is it.
This blurry picture captured the moment.
I was the last one to go aboard.
Why were you the last one?
Because I was in charge of them. And whether I stayed behind, so be it, you know, but you always take care of your men first.
The last man out.
Last man out, yeah.
You've probably seen pictures of the mob which stormed the American embassy in Saigon, desperate to find a way out in the final hours of the Vietnam War. But maybe you haven't heard the radio transmissions of the American pilots who pulled off the largest helicopter evacuation in history. I know I hadn't until we found some of them in the Marine Corps archives.
Okay, well, let's pick it up here. Looks like things are about to close up, and we want to be able to give them the support they need. Go ahead and max it out.
That's the airborne commander directing helos into both the embassy and Tan Son Nhut Airport outside Saigon to pick up hundreds of Americans and thousands of Vietnamese.
Roger, find out for sure how many aircraft Alamo needs at this time.
Alamo is the call sign for the airport, which was being shelled by advancing North Vietnamese troops.
Okay, they're on the way with their feet wet at this time, and we'll have them there as soon as possible.
Feet wet means the helos are still over the South China Sea, flying from aircraft carriers off the coast.
Okay, 2 more 53s as soon as possible.
53s are CH-53s, the largest of the helicopters.
Okay, I understand. Dash 1 and Dash 2 are fully loaded. That's a roger, then we got a big load again. Copy, about 60 per air, at least.
70 helicopters shuttling between ships and shore.
Everything's blinking and turning. Please pass to all aircraft coming inbound. They must come on with a rotating beacon. On to final. We're having problems with aircraft trying to land on each other.
2 Marines at the airport have been killed by North Vietnamese shelling, and the helicopters are in danger of being shot down.
Be advised, we're having many reports of AAA airburst at altitude and also lots of muzzle flashes with no associated tracers.
The airport, also known as Alamo, is becoming too dangerous.
Alamo says 10 more lifts and that's it. 10 more lifts. Roger, understand. 10 more lifts.
That leaves the embassy as the only way out of Saigon.
26 Bravo, proceed inbound towards the embassy area. I believe that's the area I can use you in.
But the embassy is under siege by a panicked crowd.
Okay, be advised, as I understand it, there's 2,000 uncontrollable people in the courtyard. You want to put a 53 in there?
I actually landed at the embassy about 1 o'clock.
Jerry Berry is the first pilot to land at the embassy, setting down in the parking lot. His call sign, Lady Ace 09.
This is Lady Ace 09, Roger. We're outbound at this time with our passengers. How many passengers? Lady Ace 09 has 18 on board. Lady Ace 01 has 20. Roger, 120, copy, good.
Barry flew a CH-46 helicopter. How many people does it carry?
25 combat troops. So if you carried Vietnamese who are much smaller and they weren't carrying any bags, we would put 50 to 60 on there when we'd carry them out.
The CH-46 is light enough to land on the embassy roof, opening up a second landing zone inside the crowded compound.
Land on the rooftop of the embassy, over.
Up on the roof, an attempting target.
Also felt that there was probably a lot of North Vietnamese that had infiltrated the city earlier. I felt we could have been taken out probably if somebody wanted to at about any time. It was very, very scary when you landed on that roof and you could see all those people down below.
The rooftop is also where Marine guards are burning mountains of classified documents.
The embassy's got a large fire on the rooftop at this time. They're loading people at this time. Lady H-14 is in it.
Glitches are inevitable.
The last two that went in there on Swift 2-1 flight, no one got aboard. There was nobody on the rooftop.
The helos don't have time to wait.
A helicopter has so much flight time. You could only fly a CH-46 about 2 hours.
It's about 40 minutes each way from the ships to the embassy, not counting the time it takes to load.
Unable to make any contact with anybody or get down into any of the zones. I'm now bingo fuel.
Bingo is pilot talk for low on fuel.
But now the weather gets bad. It's about 7:30, 8 in the evening. Weather comes in and it's going a little slower.
We got bad weather in the area. Are you above or below the cloud deck at this time? Sir, we're below the cloud deck at this time. Okay, now I suggest you stay in the below the cloud deck.
I'm flying up the Saigon River at about maybe 150 feet because the weather's closing in. And that's when I thought, there's got to be all kinds of wires across this river. So you pull back on this and you climb like mad. The heart stopped beating for a minute because it was dark, couldn't see anything.
And the North Vietnamese are getting closer.
I can see the tanks coming down the road.
You could see the tanks.
North Vietnamese tanks because their lights are on. They're driving down the highway.
You are to land on the rooftop and deliver a message. I say again, to deliver a message. All U.S. must come out now.
Until now, Ambassador Graham Martin has refused to leave.
I land on the embassy roof at 4:56 in the morning on 30 April 1975, and I called the Marine security guard over, and I said, you go tell the ambassador this helicopter's not leaving the roof until he's on board. And then my best aviator voice, I said, the president sends.
Order from the president. Did you have authority to?
I have no authority to do that at all. But, I mean, there's got to be an end here. 2 minutes later, his whole entourage are up, they're ready to go.
The ambassador brings the American flag with him. Did it feel to you then, hey, the war is over?
Certainly, it did. You go through this thing in your brain right away was this all for naught? Did we lose the 58,000 plus Americans? Hope for something.
Barry flies the ambassador to one of the ships offshore, only to find that the war is not over.
Well, now you have to go back and get the Marines.
We've got Swift 3-3 and Swift 2-2. Choppers going into the embassy to pick up the last Americans there. There should be about 33 to 35 of them left.
The Marines who guard the embassy are barricaded on the roof.
We thought for sure that we were going to be left there, kind of swallow hard, you know, because by that time the tanks were passing by from the Vietnamese.
Juan Valdez, now 87 and in assisted living, is the sergeant in charge. Jerome Thomas is one of his Marines.
The question that was going through everybody's mind was, should we fight or should we surrender? And everybody there to a man was like, we're fighting, you know, because Marines never surrender.
We were there for 2.5, maybe 3 hours waiting, and then all of a sudden, at a distance, we saw 2 choppers coming back.
According to the count they gave me, it should be 2-5 remaining. I'll tell you, Wes, it looked like more than 25 down there to me. I recommend that you pick up as many as you can when you go in. We had an underestimate on report before, and this is why we had to scramble YouTube or many as you can, and also when you come off, give us a good head count of how many is left for 2-2 to pick up. Roger, we'll do what we can. We've had pick up 22 on board, and there's 10 left for Swift 2-2 to pick up.
Actually, there are 11 left to be picked up by the final helo, Swift 22.
All souls on board, all souls on board. Understand, 11 packs on board with the commander.
I was the last one to go aboard.
Swift 2-2 says he is out with 11 packs on board, including the commander. All the Americans are out. That is it.